Hello and welcome to Cloud Built Right. In today's video, I will give an overview about AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM for short. I will cover about what is IAM and then some important terms like users, groups, policies and roles. But before that, please support and subscribe to my channel for more such content. What is IAM? Let's try to understand this concept with an analogy. Think of your AWS environment as a large office building. This building has many rooms, each containing valuable resources like data, applications, and services. IAM is the security system of this building. It's responsible for making sure only the right people can enter the building, that is the authentication, and access only those rooms they are supposed to, which is nothing but the authorization. So basically, it controls who can access your AWS resources and which resources they can access. To get a better understanding of IAM, you need to understand some basic concepts. Users. When you create an AWS account, you create as a root user that has complete access to all AWS resources in the account. It is strongly recommended that you don't use the root user for your everyday tasks. Also, root user credentials must not be shared with anyone. So, if multiple people in an organization want to use the same AWS account, instead of sharing root credentials, we can use IAM to set up users for each person that wants to access AWS. One IAM user will represent one person within the organization. Also, we can attach some permissions to these users, provide access to AWS resources. Each user will then have a unique set of credentials. If we consider our office building analogy, a user is like an employee. Each person will require an access card to enter the building. In AWS, a user has a unique username and password to access the resources. Groups. Groups are collections of users. Similar users can be added into groups. Users may or may not belong to a group, and users can also belong to multiple groups. Coming back to our analogy, groups are like departments within the building, such as the marketing department, sales department, IT department. Each group has access to specific rooms. Similarly, in IAM, groups allow you to manage permissions for multiple users easily. By default, users and groups have no permissions, meaning they can't access any AWS resources. We have to assign permissions to them. This is done by policies. Policies. Policies are set of permissions that can be attached to users or groups that determine which resources can be accessed by them and also what actions are allowed on these resources. Always grant permissions following the least privilege principle, that is, don't grant more permissions than a user needs. We consider our analogy, permissions are nothing but the rules which decide which rooms each person can enter and what they can do inside that room. For example, an employee in the finance department can access the financial records room, but not the server room. Similarly, in IAM, permissions control what actions the users or groups can perform and on which AWS resources they can perform that action. Roles. An IAM role is an IAM entity with specific permissions. Unlike IAM users, roles are not tied to one person, but they are intended to be assumed by anyone who needs them. Roles don't have long-term credentials like passwords or access keys. Instead, they provide temporary credentials when assumed. Roles can be assumed by users, applications, or services that normally don't have access to your AWS resources. If we consider our office building analogy, roles are like temporary badges that are given to contractors or visitors for a specific task. For example, a contractor might get a badge to access the server room for a particular day. Similarly, in AWS, roles allow you to grant temporary access to users or services for specific tasks. Now let's have a look at IAM in the AWS console. Log into your AWS Management Console, then navigate to the IAM dashboard. One important thing to notice is that IAM is a global service, it is not any region specific. Now click on Users from the left hand menu. Note that there are currently no users. I have logged in using my root credentials. Let's create a user now and give a username. Check the option Provide user access to AWS Management Console and then select I want to create an IAM user. Then for the password, you can either select auto-generated password or custom password. Also, you can uncheck this if you don't want to change your password at next sign-in. Next, you can attach permissions to the user. You can attach the policy directly or the user can be added to a group. Select Add User to a group. Let's create a group called Admin and attach administrative access policy to the group. Now the group has been created. Select it to add the user to it. Review the details and then create the user. Also download the .csv file with the user's credentials. Now you can see that user 1 has been created, and if we click on it, we see that administrative access policy has been attached via the admin group. Now let's create another user and add it to the same group. Repeat the same procedure again. Select the group admin and then create the user. Now click on user 2 and see that user 2 also has the same administrative access policy via the group admin. You can also verify this from user groups in the left hand menu. We have the admin group with 2 users. Click on that and we can see 2 users, user 1 and user 2. Now go back to user group and let's create another group called testers. And add only user 2 to this group. Then let's attach S3 full access policy to this group. So now we have 2 groups and the user 2 is part of both the groups. So user 2 must have 2 policies attached from both the groups. Let's check that now. Click on users and select user 2. See that user 2 has both the policies via admin and testers group. I hope you got an idea about how to create a user, add it to a group and also to attach a policy to the group. Now let's see how the IAM policy structure looks like. Policies are nothing but JSON documents. From the IAM dashboard, click on Policies. You can see a list of AWS managed policies. Let's open one of them. Open Administrator Access Policy and open the JSON for it. This is the JSON structure for the IAM policy. It has a version. Then under statements, we have effect, action and resources. The effect specifies whether the policy allows or denies access. Then action specifies the operation that is being allowed or denied. For example, actions can include operations like listing the contents of an S3 bucket. Next, the resources specify the AWS resources on which the actions are allowed or denied. For example, a policy might specify an S3 bucket, EC2 instance, or a DynamoDB table. Here in this policy, we have a star for action and resources. Star indicates anything. That means this policy allows any action on any resource. That is, if this policy is attached to any user, then that user is allowed to do any action on any AWS resource. Earlier, we created 2 users and added policies to the groups. Now let's go to the user groups, and in case I remove user 2 from the admin group, then it will no longer have admin access. User 2 will only have S3 full access policy now. So if we log in as user 2, then user 2 will only be able to access S3 and nothing else. We can also create our own custom policy. Click on Create Policy. Either you can use the Visual Policy Editor or you can use the JSON editor. Select a service. Action, and then a resource. Review the policy, give it a name and description, then create the policy. This custom policy can be attached to any user, group, or role. Now let's move on to IAM role. Let's consider an example to understand it better. Suppose you have an application running on an EC2 instance. EC2 instance is nothing but a virtual server in AWS. It needs to read objects from an S3 bucket, which is a storage. So now this EC2 requires permissions to access S3 bucket. Instead of embedding AWS credentials within the application, which is not secure, you can create an IAM role with the necessary permissions and then attach this IAM role to the EC2 instance. Now the EC2 instance can assume the role and it can get temporary access to read from the S3 bucket without the need to manage long-term credentials. Basically, any entity that assumes the role will receive the permissions attached to the role for a short term. Roles can even be attached to users to provide short-term access. Now, from the IAM console, choose Roles and then choose Create Role. Next, we have to select a trusted entity. Trusted entity is nothing but specifying who can assume the role. Since we want the EC2 instance to assume the role in our case, let us select AWS service, that is the first option, and then select EC2 as the service. Then attach a policy. For our example, let's select Amazon S3 read-only access to grant read-only access to S3. After selecting the policy, choose Next. Then on the review page, enter a role name and role description. Then review the policy and choose Create Role. Once the role is created, now we have to attach this role to our EC2 instance. So let's navigate to the EC2 console. In the navigation pane, choose Instances. Select the instance to which you want to attach the IAM role. Then choose Actions, Security, and then Modify IAM role. In the Modify IAM role dialog box, choose the IAM role you just created and then choose Update IAM role. So now the role is attached to the EC2 instance and the instance can easily access the S3 bucket. So that's a quick overview of AWS IAM on how to create users, groups, policies and roles. To sum up, IAM is like the security system of your AWS environment. It helps you control who can do what, keeping everything secure and organized. Understanding IAM is crucial for effectively managing access and protecting your valuable resources in AWS. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel for more such content and check out my other AWS tutorials. Thanks for watching.